Alright, now we're going to talk a little bit more about layout managers. And a layout manager determines basically how components are laid out on the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to add things to containers. So for the JFrame's content pane is a container, for example. We'll also see that we have these things called JPanels, which are generic containers. So we add things to containers, and they're laid out based on that container's layout manager. So we'll talk about a couple different layout managers. A Flowlayout lays things out from left to right, and if more room is needed, new rows are added. So in a sense, things are laid out left to right, top to bottom. A Borderlayout lays out things in 5 regions: north, south, east, west, and center. A grid layout, you specify the number of rows and columns. And what you can do, just using these 3 layouts, you can basically lay out any application that you are kind of familiar with using. Using some combination of these 3 layouts, you can recreate pretty much any desktop application. Okay, so let's look at some code. We'll start with the flow layout. Okay, so here I have a class that extends JFrame. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the content pane and call the setLayout method. Again, this comes right from the JFrame class. And what we're doing is we're saying we want a new flow layout. Okay, and then the program asks basically how many buttons would you like there to be in this flow layout. Okay, so I read that in from the JOption pane. I turn it into a number, and then for each one of those buttons, okay, I'm going to create a button, and I'm going to add it to the content pane. And because we have this flow layout, this left to right, top to bottom layout manager, what should happen is, based on the size of the JFrame, we're going to see things laid out left to right, top to bottom. Okay, so my driver, I'm going to do a couple things today here. So first version of the driver just creates this object called flow, which is a flow layout test. So I'll compile everything and run the driver. It's asking me how many buttons do I want. I'll say I want 12 buttons. And you'll see the JFrame did its best to lay things out based on the size of my window. Okay, it was able to fit 5 buttons in the first row, 5 buttons in the second row, and 2 buttons in the last row. And of course, if you resize this, the window will do its best to lay things out left to right, top to bottom. Okay, next we have that border layout. Okay, so a border layout has these regions: north, south, east, west, and center. And the center is kind of the dominant region. So the JFrame will try and we'll expand the center out as much as possible, and the border regions will be kind of as small as possible. So again, we have this border layout that extends JFrame. We get the content pane and we set the layout manager to be a new border layout. And now when we add to the content pane, this is a little bit different. We say what component do we want to add, plus the region that we want to add that component to. So we only do this with border layouts. Okay, specify these regions. But we have the north, south, east, west, and center buttons, and we're going to put those in the corresponding regions. Compile that and run it. And we see that we have north, south, east, west. As I resize these, the center is always dominant. It always takes up as much space as it can, and the border regions take up as little space as possible. Okay, next we'll talk about we're going to talk about a grid layout. Grid layout lays out things in a grid. Okay, so we have grid layout test extends JFrame. We're going to get the content pane and set the layout manager to a new grid layout. This says the grid should have 2 rows and 3 columns. Then I create 6 buttons and I just call add, like we did before. But now things will get laid out left to right, top to bottom. Okay, So our 6 buttons should show up in 2 rows and 3 columns. Okay. And no matter what I do to the screen, we're always going to maintain that grid of 2 rows and 3 columns. Okay, now I said you can combine these things to get kind of an interesting layout. Let's go to the class Borderlayout 2, which is going to combine a border layout with a grid layout, and we'll see how this works in a second here. So we have we also have these things called J-panels. A J-panel is a container of widgets, but by itself it doesn't have any. It's not. There's nothing visible about the J-panel. It just holds these other widgets, and then we can add J-panels to other containers, like the content pane, or even to other J-panels. So we have this hierarchy of containers that can contain these widgets. Okay, so what I'm doing for the main J-frame is I'm setting the layout to be a border layout, and then I'm going to create this center panel, and the center panel is going to hold some buttons. Okay, now the center panel is a J panel. It also we can specify the layout for the J panel, and we're making this one a border layout. And then I add a few buttons, and I add them to the north, center, and south of the J panel, called center panel. Then I'm going to create another panel called an east panel, and this one's going to be a grid layout with 3 rows and 1 column. Okay, and then I add a few buttons there. It should add them left to right, top to bottom. And then lastly, I get the content pane, and I add the 2 J panels, the center panel to the center and the east panel to the east. Okay. And when I run this, oops, let me change my driver to Border Layout 2. Okay, so here the center panel takes up the most space. And notice I didn't have a west panel. That's okay. The center and the north and south will occupy everything it can to the west here. The center panel here had something in the north, center, and south. And then this was our grid layout with 3 rows and 1 column. And again, we'll kind of maintain the layouts no matter what size the window is.